Chapter 13. Subject 2. It's okay. You can say it. No, that would be rude. But you want to say it. Just get it over with. Fine. Your glasses are huge. Dr. Polly Spark leaned back in her chair and laughed. Like them? Vasquez built them, especially for me. Inez was sitting across from Dr. Polly Spark in her office. It was similar to the way Inez had left it 5 years ago, when Polly was her tutor. The only real difference was the addition of a graduation certificate from Yutaka Yamamoto University, framed on the wall above Polly's head. Polly took off her oversized round glasses and showed them to Inez. Concealed within the thick rims and arms was the tiniest computer Inez had ever seen, and a digital heads-up display could be seen in the lenses. Polly returned her smart glasses to her face and rested her chin in her hands. The glasses were so large they seemed to cover the upper half of her face. Nezzy, you really have not changed a bit, Polly said. Ever thought about trying to tame that tangle you call your hair? Don't call me Nezzy. And aren't you a bit old for pigtails? Inez shot back, pointing at Polly's hair. Last time we met, you were my tutor, and I was too young to drive. Who said I'm not your tutor anymore? Polly said. Director wants me to bring you into Prometheus, and that means I've got to teach you about a lot of new stuff. I just wanted to see Cassandra, Inez replied. I'm still really worried about her. Polly stood up and grabbed a tablet computer from her desk. We'll get to that, newbie, Polly told her. But first, there's a lot I've got to show you before I can take you to see Subject 2. April 11th, 2086. Bannack, Montana. Polly and Inez made their way to the central elevator and started the trip down to the lower levels of Bannack Base. Project Prometheus is a very large operation with a lot of moving parts, Polly explained. Director Freeman showed you the prototype engine, but there's so much more than that. Mom said we could regenerate psionic energy with the engine, Inez said. That's the ultimate goal, Polly replied. But the prototype engine here in Bannack is too small to get the job done. The full-sized engine at the Divine Atelier should be able to do it, though. Where is... Inez started to ask, but before she could finish, the elevator doors opened and a third person stepped inside. David Sepulveda reached out to push one of the buttons, but stopped when he realized he and Polly and Inez were all going to the same place. So instead, he turned to talk to them as the elevator door slid shut. Good to see you, Doctor, David said. You too, Inez. I look forward to working with you. Inez felt a chill run up her spine. She could tell that David was looking her up and down, and that he, like Inez, was thinking about their encounter at the Victory Day dance 5 years ago. Her mind was filling with bad memories. Inez shrank away from David. She kept her eyes on Polly, trying to signal that she was feeling uncomfortable. Polly missed the signal completely, instead trying to introduce David as though Inez had never met him before. This is Central Officer Sepulveda, Polly said. He's from a branch of the UN military called XCOM. He's taking the lead on the weaponization aspects of Prometheus. It's okay, Dr. Spark, David said. We've met before. At that moment, the elevator doors opened. They had arrived on level 7. Near the bottom of Bannack Base. As the trio stepped off the elevator, Inez tried to put as much distance between herself and David as possible, but he tapped her on the shoulder and asked her to wait for just a moment. Terrified, Inez kept her arms close and she hunched over a little, preparing to run, but she was completely caught off guard by what David said next. Agent Espinosa? I owe you an apology. David kept his face relaxed and his eyes locked on Inez, and gestured with an open palm as he spoke. That night at the Victory Day dance, I mistreated you. Badly. I hurt you because I was selfish, and that is no excuse. You have every right to be angry with me. I regret what I did to you every day, and I'm sorry. I will never do that again. To anyone, including you. Inez said nothing. She was stunned and a little shocked by the sudden apology. Polly just stared at the two of them, slowly realizing that she was missing some important context. Finally, the bespectacled scientist reached out and grabbed Inez by the shoulder. Whenever you're ready, Agent Espinosa. Rattled back into action, Inez gave David an awkward nod and moved to follow Polly deeper into the facility. David followed them for a short distance, but when the hallway branched into 3 separate paths, he vanished down a different corridor and was gone. All right, Agent, Polly said. Tell me, what do you know about the Avatar Project? Inez was not expecting the question, and she stumbled over her words while trying to look at the many closed doors on either side of the hallway. Well, I know it was a secret project by the old Advent regime, she said. The aliens wanted to find humans who were sensitive to psionic energy, and they used the sensitive folks to build a new life form, the Avatar. Tens of thousands of people died just to make one. Polly waved a hand dismissively and opened a set of double doors. What matters is that you understand the concept of psionic sensitivity. That is the starting point for what we are doing down here. Take a look. Inez and Polly had arrived at what must be the central hub of what was happening down here. Quickly, Inez realized that she had just walked through an underground office complex that was situated between the elevator and this place. A cafeteria, even bigger than the one Inez dined at 5 stories up, was carved out of an underground cavern. Long tables stood in 6 rows, while an opening in the rock wall led to the kitchens. Doorways and archways provided an extra 7 entrances and exits to the place. But it was not the curious layout that caught Inez's attention. Rather, it was the people eating breakfast at the long tables. Aliens. About 500 aliens were all eating or drinking various things Inez did not recognize. Inez was shocked to see that nearly every spacefaring species in the galaxy was represented here, from the human-like Higarans, Tidani, Pardogans, and slightly more recognizable species like Kelt, Vanians, and Ashurians. Inez could see freakishly strange aliens like the Rocky Praku, amphibious Vagar, and nigh incomprehensible silicoid life forms. Finally, Inez spotted a table populated by aliens who came from the same cabal of species that carried out the 2015 invasion of Earth. Sectoids, mutons, vipers, and even a small faceless were all shoveling food into their mouths. Wait a minute. A small faceless? Inez did a double take. She looked at the faceless on the far side of the room. She knew these slime-covered bipeds could stand nearly 12 feet tall, yet when this particular faceless was seated, Inez found herself at its eye level. That could not be right. Polly was standing by the cafeteria door, looking at Inez as though gauging her reaction. Inez looked around the hall again, and her mouth fell open. Polly? Inez gasped. Are they all? Polly did not answer, and that was confirmation enough. Inez could work out the truth for herself. At the table closest to her was a group of avians. These bird-like aliens hailed from 3 different species: Vanians, Amadi, and Saibon. All of the birds squawked and honked at each other as they pecked away at their breakfast, and there was one thing they all had in common. They still had the fluffy, downy feathers of a bird that hatched only a short time ago. The Cybon fledglings were singing in very high-pitched voices, and their feathers were soft and downy. These aliens were juveniles. Inez looked from the Levakian cubs to Kelt hatchlings before gazing open-mouthed at Polly. A neonate viper, no more than 3 feet long, slithered along the floor between Polly's feet before curling up underneath a space heater on the far side of the room. The young viper, like every other alien in the room, was dressed in a gray jumpsuit that looked like the sort of thing a person would wear in a maximum security prison. Each alien had a 4-digit number sewn onto the right sleeve of his or her uniform, or on the front of whatever passed for the chest. "They're all children," Inez said. "Alien kids." "Yes, they are," Polly replied coolly. "But where are they coming from?" Inez pressed. "We have ways," Polly replied in a non-committal tone. "If there's one thing the other species of the galaxy can do right, it's keeping us well supplied with new subjects to test. Quite a few of them have demonstrated psionic potential, but so far none of them have been able to surpass the performance of Subject 2. Polly pointed towards the furthest, most distant corner of the room. Here, Inez saw about 50 alien children all gathered in a group. They were cheering and clapping at something they clearly found wonderful. Polly signaled Inez to follow. Pushing on little heads and shoulders, Inez waded into the group of children, craning her neck to see what had drawn their attention. In the center of a semicircle, Inez spotted a familiar face. It was Cassandra. Like the others, she was wearing the same prisoner's garb as everyone else, with the number 0002 embroidered on her sleeve. Compared with the last time Inez had seen her, Cassandra looked noticeably different. Cassandra had lost some of her color. She looked pale and skinny, even more so than previously. Also, Cassandra's hair, once long enough to touch her waist, had been cut short. Now, Cassandra's black hair barely reached her shoulders, and she had one bald spot on the right side of her head, covered up with a thick bandage that could only be explained by recent brain surgery. Yet, Cassandra was clearly having fun. A very young Cybon with colorful plumage was sitting on her shoulder, singing a cheerful tune. Humming in time with her avian companion, Cassandra was dancing along to the music. Cassandra twirled in place and shot green sparks from her hand, which flew into the air and snapped like tiny fireworks, showering the place with her twinkling green lights. Levakian cubs swatted at the falling sparks, while Amadi and Vanians were transfixed by the light show. A Partogan boy was dancing as well, pretending to do the same thing as Cassandra. Lost in the joyful oblivion, Cassandra stood up on her tiptoes and twirled like an old-world ballerina. A constellation of emerald sparks spun away from her waist like the folds of a skirt before gently settling to the ground. A group of juvenile Vagar reached out to catch the flickering green lights in their slimy graspers before they went out. Inez found herself feeling very conflicted. On the one hand, she was filled with immense joy for Cassandra. Seeing the little girl happy after everything that happened earlier took a huge load off Inez's shoulders. She'd been worried about Cassandra ever since that night in Michigan. But she still could not forget the other side of Cassandra, the terrifying specter of violence and flame, which emerged at the very moment Cassandra realized she was being abducted. Instinctively, Inez reached up to feel the sore patches of skin on her face and neck. The burns were gone, thanks to a little in-house gene therapy, but Inez could still feel a twinge of pain as she thought back to that night. To her left, Polly began to applaud loudly. "Beautiful, Subject 2! Beautiful! So beautiful!" Polly said to Cassandra. "Your talents are the pride and joy of Bannack." The show ended abruptly. All of the sparkling lights around Cassandra went out as though someone had thrown a blanket over the whole scene. Cassandra looked at Polly, and Inez saw the little girl shrink backwards. Cassandra was clearly frightened of Polly. But then, Cassandra spotted Inez. Like a bullet from a gun, Cassandra shot through the crowd of children towards Inez and wrapped around her in the biggest hug such a small child can possibly give. "Nezzy!" Cassandra cried out. "It's you! You came back!" Cassandra opened her mouth to voice her usual complaint, but thought better of it. Instead, she returned Cassandra's hug and said, "I'm so happy to see you. I was worried after you... Well, I didn't know what happened to you." "The good news is," Polly interrupted, "Subject 2 is fine now. Isn't that right? You have been taking your medicine." Cassandra nodded obediently. "2 pills with breakfast, just like you said," she replied. "Good," Polly said. "We can get started then. Subject 2, Agent Espinosa, follow me, please." Inez was back to feeling nervous. She followed along behind Cassandra as Polly escorted them to a complex of rooms right next door to the children's quarters. "This is a pediatric gene therapy clinic," Polly explained. "I come here all the time," Cassandra said energetically. "Did you ever come here, Nezzy?" "No," Inez replied. "I didn't." Cassandra was holding on to Inez's hand as the trio entered the clinic. Nobody at reception said anything to Polly. They saw her and pushed a button to unlock the doors. Polly led the pair into a small waiting room filled with children's toys. Cassandra let go of Inez and set about brushing the fur of a very large stuffed animal in the corner. Meanwhile, Polly pushed a button on the intercom by the door. "Subject 2 is here early today. Agent Espinosa will be joining us for today's test." A voice replied through the speaker. "Go to the observation deck. We'll get everything ready in here." Inez was alarmed at being made to separate from Cassandra so soon after reuniting with her. But Polly gave Inez one of those stern looks she'd never been able to resist as a child. Cassandra whimpered when she saw Inez and Polly leaving, but Inez quickly said to her, "I'm not going far. I'll be back." The observation deck's name betrayed its true nature. Looking around, Inez realized Polly had brought her to a reinforced underground bunker. One far wall was made entirely out of bulletproof glass, allowing the people in the observation deck to look down at a small, nondescript chamber that contained nothing except a single metal chair, which was bolted to the floor. Computers and tables strewn with paperwork told Inez that this was the place she'd heard so much about during her childhood. "I heard about this room when I was a kid," she said aloud. Polly shrugged as though this was not supposed to be a secret. "Not surprised," she said. "We conducted some of our more dangerous experiments in this pit. I'm sure you were shaken awake by the work we do down here more than once. Your the director, has given us permission to let you into the work now, since you've developed something of a relationship with Subject 2. Inez was starting to feel sick. She regretted leaving Cassandra alone in that room. "And what work exactly are you talking about?" she asked. The doors to the observation deck opened again, and a group of scientists came in. A few of them greeted Polly before setting up at the workstations around the deck. One of the scientists stared down into the chamber below, then snatched a quick glance at Inez. With a lurch of the stomach, she realized this man was yet another one of her former clients from Binary Fusion. Just how many people in Bannack Base had paid Inez for a roll in the hay? A voice spoke over the intercom. "This is Dr. Shen calling observation team. Central Officer Sepulveda is ready to begin." Subject 2 will enter the chamber from the south door. Inez felt a sinking feeling in her gut. She knew what was going on now. She was going to witness one of the many tests and experiments Cassandra was being subjected to. Down below, in full view of the people in the observation deck, a door opened and 2 people entered. Cassandra was pushed into the chamber by a tall man dressed from head to foot in a suit made of fireproof material. Keeping the visor down, the man guided Cassandra to the simple metal chair in the middle of the room. He must have been wired up with a microphone because his voice was being piped into the observation deck for everyone to hear. "Now sit in this chair and we'll get started," Dr. Shen said.
"No," Cassandra protested. "Every time I sit in that thing, bad stuff happens. I don't wanna."
Cassandra started pulling away from Dr. Shen, trying to escape. The man grabbed Cassandra by the wrist and started strong-arming her toward the chair. Inez whimpered.
"Hey, Polly," she whispered. "Is this all necessary? We're scaring her."
Polly narrowed her eyes at the scene playing out below. Then she said,
"Espinosa's right."
Polly keyed the intercom and spoke. Her voice piped into the test chamber.
"Shen, hold for a minute, okay?"
Dr. Shen stopped trying to force Cassandra into the chair. Both he and the girl looked up at the glass windows of the observation deck. Inez breathed a sigh of relief. She did not want to watch Cassandra be tormented. She started to think that she might be able to convince Polly and the others to treat Cassandra and the other children more gently. Yeah, now that Inez thought about it, this might just be the reason why her father had fallen out with Scarlett. In her mind, Inez thought this made sense. Cassandra was being treated badly, and maybe Inez could find a way to change that. This fantasy flourished in Inez's mind for about 2 seconds, and then Polly swiftly destroyed it.
"Nezzy, Cassandra listens to you. Tell her to get in the chair."
Inez was struck dumb by this demand. She just stared at Polly. Around her, nearly 24 scientists were staring at Inez and gesturing at her as if to say, "Hurry up already."
"Subject 2 always gives us trouble at the start of these procedures," Polly complained. "But we know she trusts you, so tell her she's going to be fine. But first she needs to get in the chair and let Shen wire her up."
"But," Inez stammered, "but..." She was trying to think of a way to get out of doing this, but her will was being worn down by the intense stares of everybody around her. "Get on with it already," a scientist grumbled. "We're on a tight schedule." "The boys in radiology get to have Subject 2 later tonight," complained another researcher. "Can we move this along while we've actually got her to ourselves?"
"Do it,"
Polly growled. It was an order, not a suggestion. Giving in to the pressure from everyone around her, Inez leaned forward and spoke into the microphone.
"Cassandra? Hey, it's Inez. We just want to do some simple tests, okay? You're going to be fine, but we've got to get this over with, understand? Please, just sit in the chair and let the good doctor wire you up, alright? It's going to be okay. I'm right here on the other side of the glass. You'll be fine."
Through the glass, Inez watched Cassandra for a moment. The little girl nodded and finally stopped resisting. She held still as Dr. Shen used leather straps to bind Cassandra, pinning her hands to the armrests and tying her legs to the chair itself. To her left, Inez noticed out the corner of her eye that she was being stared at. Under her breath, Polly mumbled, "Incredible. Director Freeman was right about her." Finally, Dr. Shen left the room. The last words he said on his way out the door was, "We're set up. She's all yours." Polly turned her head towards the other scientists in the room and said, "Central Officer Sepulveda has entered the test chamber. First test will commence at 10:30 in the morning, Mountain Standard Time. Polly pushed a chair over to Inez. Take a seat. Polly's voice was now filled with excitement, as though she'd been waiting for this day to come. I'll have your next instructions in a minute. Just sit here and wait. Inez did not sit down. She was wrestling with several impulses. She wanted to smash her way through the glass and wrench Cassandra out of whatever terror Inez had unwittingly sentenced her to. But before she could decide what to do, the door opened and someone else entered the observation deck. Shame on you, Polly, for starting without us, Scarlett Freeman said. You know how much the three of us wanted to see a full demonstration. Scarlett entered the room with two other people by her side. UN Admiral Ingrid Siajotso was leading Secretary General Pascal Etienne by the arm. The Admiral talked in Pascal's ear, giving him a detailed description of the room and the people in it. The UN leader himself was holding a cane in one hand and was using it to feel his surroundings. Your daughter is acclimating well, Polly said. She helped us get the experiment off the ground. As Scarlett took the open chair, she looked at Inez and said, Excellent, Inez, thank you. We were in quite a rut thanks to your father, but we now have a path forward again. Then Scarlett turned to speak to the UN Secretary General. Director Freeman, are you confident that you will be able to do this safely? Pascal asked. We cannot replace the girl quickly, you know. We've accounted for that, Scarlett replied. Inez, dear, I think Dr. Spark is ready for you. Polly addressed Inez. Subject 2 clearly trusts you. She's spoken about you a few times already. All we need you to do is keep her calm and docile. Just keep talking to her. Inez was frozen in fear. She knew exactly what was going to happen, and so, apparently, did everyone else. Scarlett, Pascal, and Ingrid were all staring at her expectantly. Inside the testing chamber, David Sepulveda, similarly dressed in flame-retardant clothing, was approaching the now restrained Cassandra. In his right hand, David was carrying the end of a long plastic tube that coiled like a snake behind him. Cassandra saw this and started to squirm uncomfortably in her restraints. Is there any danger to us? Pascal Etienne asked. I've been told about what happens if this girl loses control. No, sir, Scarlett replied. No danger at all. These bunkers were designed to withstand nuclear explosions. Polly passed a microphone to Inez. Sepulveda is about to get started, Polly said. Just keep the girl calm. Inez opened her mouth to speak, and at first, her voice cracked. Cass? It's Nezzy. Can you hear me? Cassandra stopped struggling and looked around, trying to see where Inez's voice was coming from. David's not going to hurt you, Inez said. You're going to be just fine, okay? Listen to my voice. Just listen to me. Inez knew she needed to keep talking, but she was drawing a complete blank on what to say. Inside the test chamber, Cassandra was looking at David, and she, like Inez, had just realized the long tube had a syringe at the end. Cassandra took one look at the needle and started to moan and squirm. No, Inez said into the microphone. She was thinking fast, desperately trying to find something to say. Listen to me. Listen, Cassandra. I'm gonna sing you a song. Inez remembered how Cassandra had danced along to the Saibon's music earlier, and she clutched onto that thought. She desperately wished she had her guitar, but it was probably collecting dust in her old Detroit apartment. Instead, Inez started to sing off the cuff, reciting a very old tune that came from the old world. Sail on after me, love. Will you sail on after me? Will you fight the waves of oceans? Will you still believe? The effect was immediate. Cassandra stopped squirming. She was focusing on the music coming from above. Moving as slowly as he could, David started to insert the syringe into Cassandra's forearm. Inez distracted her by continuing to sing. When I say hold up now, will you stand against the breeze? Will you stand tall and surrender none to me? On the floor, the entire plastic tube lit up as though it was a neon light fixture, glowing with a brilliant shade of bright green light. David waved to the observation deck. Cassandra was tapping her foot in time with the music, and Polly gave Inez a hand signal that said, "Keep going!" All of the scientists in the observation deck were frantically taking readings and making notes. Scarlett looked at a series of computer screens and gasped, "The power!" At Polly's request, Inez continued to sing. She launched into the chorus, picking up the tempo a little to hold Cassandra's interest. You say I'll never fall from grace. You know I'll never call your bluff. You know I'll never see your face and say it's not enough. You know that it's a long way down. You know I may not come around. You know that we're a far way now to where we're coming from. What have we become? Director, Polly called out, I think we've seen enough. Inez stopped singing right away. She couldn't help but notice that everybody in the room seemed to have been affected by her singing. A few noses sniffed, and there were tears running down Pascal Etienne's face. Everybody in the room, except for Scarlett, had been moved on some level. Quite right, Scarlett spoke in an unnaturally calm voice. It's time to stop. Inez heard a clatter of noise. 2 XCOM soldiers had stepped into the test chamber below. Inez could see they were armed with arc throwers, a non-lethal energy pistol that was normally carried by police officers. From somewhere deep in the base, there was a loud, clunking sound. At once, the glowing green light in the tube faded away. Once it was out, David removed the syringe from Cassandra's arm. This has got to be the easiest test we've ever had, David said aloud. Director, we really should have paired Espinosa and Subject 2 a lot sooner. I agree, Scarlett said. Take S2 back to her cell and, just to be safe, knock her out. Yes, ma'am, replied a soldier. Setting arc thrower to 1.21 gigawatts. What? Inez screamed, but it was too late. One of the XCOM soldiers raised his arc thrower, aiming directly at Cassandra's chest. There was a blinding white light and a painfully loud crack, as though a bolt of lightning had just struck the room. Inez blinked furiously until her eyesight returned a moment later. Cassandra was slumped over in her chair, unconscious. For a moment, there was silence. Well, Inez could not be sure that it was actual silence, since her ears were ringing. But after a moment, Inez regained her senses and heard this conversation between Scarlett and Polly. Wow, look at these numbers, Scarlett was saying. Just wow. You can't say that twice, Polly laughed. How about we do the next test above ground, Director? Just in case Subject 2 pops off again, like she did in... what was the name of that town again? Osowo? Owasa? Owosu? Whatever. That little backwater in Michigan. Are you kidding? Scarlett sounded like a kid on her own birthday. Package Subject 2 for transport, right now. She's going to the Divine Adelaide tonight.